morning. Today we are starting chapter 16, World War II. We left off last week with the New Deal helping to get us out of the Depression. It didn't get us all the way out of the Depression, but it helped people. And we talked about how the thing that truly got the United States out of the Great Depression was World War II and all of the jobs that opened up with that. So let's look at some of these key terms for World War II. We have our Axis powers. These are the nations that fought against the Allies during World War II. They were led by Germany, Italy, and Japan. What did we call the group that fought against the Allies in World War I? Who remembers what name they had? Ethan? The Central Powers. So now they're called the Axis powers. So the name changed a little bit. Some of our groupings can change too. Who is allied with who? So we see that Germany, Italy, and Japan are the big leaders of the Axis powers. So the Allies are the nations that fought against the Axis powers during World War II. Led by Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. So you can see that we were still allied with the Soviet Union at this time. Things change after World War II. So we'll learn about that when we talk about the Cold War. Because ever since World War II, when the Cold War started, till now, we're not allies with Russia. Soviet Union broke up, so Russia was a big part of the Soviet Union. But now we are allies with Germany and Italy and Japan. So things change. Wars happen and everything shifts and changes. Civilian. Civilian is a person not on active military duty. During a war. So it's the people who are not the soldiers, people who are not going off to fight. Those are the civilians. The home front is the area of civilian activity during a war. So most civilians are still back here in our home country during the war because they're not going off to war. So the home front is where what the civilians are doing back here, what we're doing to help support the war effort. Rationing. We have some recent experience with rationing. It is the limiting the amount of certain foods or materials that one is allowed to purchase. What have we had rationed in recent times, Gabby? Toilet paper. When the pandemic first hit, people kind of went a little crazy. We had to ration water, bottled water. We had to ration toilet paper. We had to ration Clorox wipes, face masks, all those kinds of things because people went, oh my goodness, we're not going to be able to get this. We won't have access to it. So everybody swarmed to the stores and bought up a whole bunch of it, and then the shelves were empty. So the stores had to start rationing. When they would get a new supply in, they'd say you can only buy one package because we need to spread it so more people can buy these products. Edward. Right now, we are in a huge baby formula shortage. So we've kind of evened out with the Clorox and the toilet paper and those things. But right now, there's a shortage of baby formula. So, and that's very serious because we can't find other stuff to take the place of the baby formula. With the bottled water, you could drink tap water. There's things that you could still drink. Baby formula, that's all the babies can eat. If they're not being fed by their moms, they're being fed that formula. And that's all that there is. So it's very serious right now with the shortage of the baby formula. Andrea? You know, that is a great question. I have not researched why there's the shortage. I just know there is a shortage. And I'm not sure what happened. I don't know if it was the factories that make it, if it's whatever they use. Yeah, but where did the breakdowns happen in that supply chain? Is it right from the production of it? Is it not being able to get it to people? Colin?
Does it like have to do with how from sometimes we don't?
I don't think it has to do with not working with like Russia and stuff. You're thinking about the war in Ukraine. I don't believe it's connected to that, but I'm not positive because I haven't looked it up. I know that it's hard to get new cars right now because there's a chip shortage of the microchip that they use in cars because the material that they use to make the chips, and it was like that for cell phones too, stuff that uses these little microchips, that material was being mined in China, and with the pandemic it was hard to get the products from China, but I don't know what's causing the shortage specifically for the formula. But there is definitely a shortage of formula right now. Victory Garden is a private or community garden that people planted to help relieve food shortages during wartime. So during the pandemic, it was mostly the materials, the toilet paper, the Clorox wipes, the face mask. Those were the things that were in shortage, in short supply. There were sometimes you'd go to the store looking for some food items and they wouldn't have them in stock that time. And then you'd go back the next time and they would have some in stock. So we didn't have huge food shortages during the pandemic. Sometimes it was in short supply, but we were able to get more in. During wartime, there was a lot of food shortages, especially during World War II. There was tremendous food shortage because the soldiers were going off to war and we had to feed them. So a lot of food was going to a lot of soldiers. There were a lot of people that joined the military. And some of them were the farmers. So the farmers weren't able to produce as much as they had been. And remember the problems that the farmers had during the farm crisis. Anna, why don't you go sit at the side table, please? Thank you. So there was the farm crisis, and then during the Great Depression, the farmers had even more problems. So there was problems with the farmers to begin with, and then our demand increased greatly. So there was a big shortage of like the fresh foods. So we had people planting their own gardens to help themselves, to help their communities. They would have community gardens to grow that food that the farmers weren't able to get to them. Andrea, what did you want to say?
I remember reading somewhere that one of the shortages, it was either one or two, but one of them were bananas. And so, and Twin Peaks were around, and so Twin Peaks used to be originally banana filling, but then we had to switch to banana.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, and people would have to adapt and make changes. So the Twinkies that were originally filled with bananas had to change to vanilla because there wasn't any bananas around. So they had to make changes to see what was in supply still and what was being rationed. That's very interesting. Our last key term is the draft. A draft is when you select and require people to serve in the military. So whenever there is a wartime, when the United States is going to war, there's always a chance that we might have to enable the draft. So whenever a young man turns 18, Mateo just turned 18 this year, he had to register for the draft. He had to sign up for it. They are not drafting anyone right now because we're not in a big war. Sometimes when it's a huge war like World War II or the Vietnam War, they have to enact the draft because not enough people are signing up to go to war. Sometimes if it's a smaller war, there's enough people in the military, there's enough people signing up, enlisting in the military on their own that we don't need more soldiers. So they don't call up the draft. So you just never know if the draft is going to be started up or not. I honestly don't think we have had to use the draft since the Vietnam War. That's something I'm not 100% certain on that, but I don't believe we've had the draft since I've been alive. So you don't think we have either?
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Because the only other war we fought is the
Iraq.
Yeah, the Iraq.
Well, we've had the two. In the 80s, there was the Gulf War, and then there was the war that we were just fighting in Afghanistan. There was the Korean War was before Vietnam. I don't know if they had to enact the draft for the Korean War. Not positive on that one. I know definitely the Vietnam War, and we're going to be learning about it with World War II. So we're going to be learning some United States, some world history with World War II because it affected the whole world. When World War II started, that's when the Great War, when their name changed. Because instead of being the Great War, then it was called World War I. Because now we have World War II with so many countries being involved. Did you just look it up?
Yeah, you were right. The last one we did was
Vietnam. Okay. Yay. So I do know a little thing or two on my own without having to research it. Who knows when World War II started? What year did it start? Without looking it up on devices, without looking in your books. Paul? 1941 is an important year, but it is not when the war actually started. When did the war start, Naveen?
1939.
Yeah, it started in 1939, and again, it started over in Europe and Asia. Because we know Japan was a part of it. So it started over in Europe, and then the United States got sucked in 1941. What happened in 1941, Brielle? The bombing of Pearl Harbor. What day? It's the day that lives on in infamy. What day was it? Andrea? Nope. What do you think?
I want to say December 7th.
I'm pretty sure it's December 7th.
And then we joined the war.
Yep, and then we joined the war the day after. So we joined in 1941. So that's why 1941 is a big year, but it's not when the war actually started. That's when we joined the war. Edward. Wow. So tell us what the U.S. Arizona is. Shh. Listen.
The U.S. Arizona was one of the ships that was sunken by the Japanese.
Yep. So the Arizona was in port at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese were bombing, and it was sunk, and it's still underwater today. So when you go to Pearl Harbor to visit, to see the memorial, the Arizona is still there. And there are people, I believe it's a tomb. There's still bodies in the Arizona. What?
It's a gravesite.
Yeah, it's a gravesite because that's the tomb of the people that weren't able to get off. And there's oil still leaking out of it. Oh, are they? Oh, very cool. Yeah, so Pearl Harbor is fascinating. What happened there, why it happened, how we were able to fight off the Japanese and not be completely, or have our Navy completely destroyed. Chase.
I've actually been there too.
I would love to go there. That's very cool that you were able to see it in person. So when we read more, if you have anything you want to share with us. All right, so we are going to start our reading of chapter 16, page 341, World War II. From 1941 to 1945, the United States fought alongside the Allies in World War II. So we see that 1941 there, but that's because that's when the U.S. was actually in the war. With the country at war, Minnesotans worked for the war effort in the armed forces and on the home front. Meet some of these individuals and learn about the role government plays during wartime. While Minnesota, the United States, and most of the world struggled to cope with the hardships of the Great Depression. So the Great Depression didn't just affect the United States. It was affecting a lot of countries. So when our stock market crashed, it kind of sent out waves throughout the rest of the world. So other people were affected by it. Because were we able to import and export products like we normally did? No, because we were in a depression. So then other countries weren't selling their products to us like they normally do. They weren't getting products from us like they normally do. And it affected their economy. So a second world war was brewing. The Depression made life miserable for people all over the world, not just in the United States. People were unemployed and businesses were failing. In much of Europe, countries still struggled to rebuild economies that had been destroyed during World War I. Starvation threatened millions of Europeans. Fear and frustration led them to question their leaders, creating opportunities for new leaders. In Germany and Italy, cruel dictators rose to power. Who knows who was the dictator in Germany?
Hitler.
Thank you for those of you raising your hands. Colin, who was the dictator? Adolf Hitler. Who was the dictator in Italy? Peyton?
Wasn't it, didn't it start with like a G or an E?
Oh, I know.
He had like blonde hair.
Well, you could say that about a lot of people. Tristan.
Wasn't it Benito?
Benito is the first
Mussolini.
name. Mussolini is his last name. So Hitler was leading Germany. Mussolini was leading Italy.
I only know that because Dr. Seuss.
It's gonna be
I don't remember what his name was off the top of my head. The Japanese leader.
No, I know his first name was Paul.
I would have to look it up. Japan. Oh, so these two nations in 1936, these two nations signed a partnership agreement, forming what became known as the Axis. Japan, which wanted to control the Pacific region, joined the Axis in 1940. So Germany and Italy wanted to take control of Europe. Andrea, please stop talking. Germany and Italy wanted to take control of Europe, and Japan wanted to take control of the Pacific Ocean area. So all of those Asian islands. So they joined in 1940. War in Europe. Germany's dictator, Adolf Hitler, promised to restore the strength and pride his nation had enjoyed before being defeated in World War I. Part of his plan was to seize land from neighboring countries. In 1939, this is what begins World War I. In 1939, his troops invaded Poland, and that's seen as the start of the war. The leaders of Great Britain, France, and several other countries feared that Hitler would continue to attack his neighbors if they did nothing to stop him. They responded by declaring war on Germany. World War II had begun. So it started with Great Britain, France, and some other countries, European countries, saying, nope, you cannot do this. At first, most Americans and most Minnesotans wanted to stay out of what people considered a European war. Still, the United States could not ignore what was happening in Europe. In 1940, after defeating Poland and occupying much of Eastern Europe, Germany's army swept through and occupied Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. In 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Great Britain suffered nightly bombing raids and feared a German invasion. The United States became alarmed and started sending weapons and supplies to its close ally, Great Britain, to help it hold off the Germans. So the United States didn't join the war, but they started sending supplies. So they started supporting the ally countries. So is Germany going to like that? No. The Axis powers don't want support coming in to the Allies, so it's going to make them want to stop that support. Meanwhile, war was also brewing in Asia and on the islands in the Pacific Ocean. In the 1930s, Japan invaded northern China, Korea, and parts of Southeast Asia. Japan wanted to expand its empire and take over countries that had valuable natural resources such as iron, salt, coal, and land for farming. The United States benefited greatly from trade with the countries Japan was invading, so it considered Japan a military threat. For a while, the United States and Japan tried to resolve their differences peacefully, but military leaders in Japan believed war between the two nations could not be avoided. So let's look at the maps on page 343. So we can see in the green would be the Allies, in the red are the Axis. So we've got Italy, Germany, and let's see. So they've got the list. So the Allied nations are all of the green. They're not all listed on the green, but they're in the box. There's the United States, Great Britain, France, Soviet Union, Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, China, Denmark, Greece, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Poland, and India. Then the Axis nations would be Germany, Italy, Japan, Finland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Thailand. So you can see there's a whole lot more green fighting against the red. So World War II was the deadliest and most widespread conflict in history. Nations from every continent except Antarctica participated in World War II. Fighting took place on land, in the air, and by sea. Labeled on this map are the major Allied and Axis nations, and many other nations were also aligned with either the Allies or the Axis, and they are listed in the boxes. The extent of Axis control in the Pacific region in August 1942. Axis nation Japan wanted to control the land and water in the Pacific region. The red line on this map shows the amount of island territory and ocean controlled by Japan at the height of its power in August of 1942. And you can see all that area that Japan controlled. So that was really big. Extent of the Axis control in Europe and North Africa, January of 1943. Oof. So if we look up at the map on top, you can see what the Axis powers countries were, how small that was. Then look down on the map that shows the extent of their control, how much they spread. So the Axis powers, Germany and Italy, invaded and controlled many countries in Europe and North Africa during World War II. This map shows the furthest extent of control by Germany and Italy at the height of their power in January of 1942. So you can see that the red, the orange, the yellow, the places that are not green is how much they spread out. So they were really putting up a good fight, spreading into the other countries. War hits the United States. On December 7th, 1941, Japan attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The United States was at war. Since Japan had already made an alliance with Germany and Italy, the war was now a worldwide conflict. On one side were the Axis nations led by Germany, Italy, and Japan. On the other side were the Allies, an alliance that included Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States. World War II touched the lives of Minnesotans and other Americans in all sorts of ways. On the one hand, it brought new jobs and pumped money into the economy. Remember, that's what helped get us out of the Depression. So it helped our economy. But on the other hand, it forced almost everyone to make sacrifices. As with every war, it destroyed lives and shattered dreams. Life in Minnesota changed drastically during the war. People worried about very basic concerns such as getting enough food and keeping their loved ones safe. If they're having to do rationing, they're really missing out on stuff. They don't have the certain foods. They don't have the materials they need. There's the draft. People are going to war. So people are worried about any soldiers that they know. People are worried about where they're going to get food to have their next meal. So even though the war helped the economy, there was a lot of other problems going on. Going to war. In the U.S. government, no one branch is supposed to have more power than the others. What are the three branches of government, Peyton?
Executive, judicial, and legislative.
Yeah, the executive, the president, the judicial, the courts, and the legislative, the Senate, the representatives that pass the laws. So not one has more power than the other. It's a checks and balance. They take care of each other. The process of going to war is one example of this separation of powers. Congress represents the legislative branch, and the president represents the executive branch. To engage in a war with another nation, these two branches must work together. The Constitution requires the following. Article 2, Section 2 gives the executive branch command of the nation's armed forces. He is the commander-in-chief. So the armed forces do what he says. Article 1, Section 8 provides the legislative branch with the power to declare war. So even though he's in charge, the president is in charge of the military as that commander-in-chief, He can't say we're going to war. He can tell the different branches of the military how to fight, but he can't tell them that we're actually going to war. That takes the legislative branch. In World War II, formal declarations of war were made against Germany, Italy, and Japan. Only 5 wars in U.S. history have begun because formal declarations of war were made. This process includes the president requesting Congress pass legislation making a declaration of war against another nation. Once passed, the president signs the declaration. Congress can also pass bills authorizing war or funding military actions. As with all legislation passed by Congress, bills related to war go to the president to be signed into law. Regardless of whether the war has been formally declared or authorized by Congress, both the executive and legislative branches are involved in the process. Can you name a war the United States has been involved in since World War II? Say it louder. Vietnam War. What's another war we've been involved in, Edward? Iraq. What's another one, Tristan? Korean. Paul? The Cold War wasn't a war that we fought.
More or less.
So we're going to learn, we call it a war, but it's not a military war where we're soldiers shooting at each other. It's different. So that was part of the Cold War, the space race, but that's not a war. And again, it's not soldiers fighting each other. Ryan. Afghanistan. Mia. There wasn't a European war that we fought in. So there was World War II that the whole war fights in. Oh, and I'm seeing our friends are at the door, so we are going to have to stop for today. We will talk more about World War II tomorrow. For my friends at home, we hope you're well and hope to see you soon.